before you were saying that you'd kind of game this out, and you'd thought about where some of the pain points might be for the two sides if we don't go the sort of administrative limited route, but if the gloves come off. If there is a trade war between the UK and the EU, what are the kind of tools the two sides might deploy, and what are we likely to see, and who suffers?
So I should actually say this. So what I've gamed out is more of a proportionate response, because actually, insofar as if you're going full trade war, EU just suspends the TCA, right? And if you're going really extreme, you suspend the whole lot. I don't think this is necessarily going to happen, but so you're not just talking trade, you're talking aviation, you're talking haulage, you're talking lots of other things around justice and home affairs. You just really so that's the extreme. But if you're taking a more targeted approach, and let's say Article 16 is triggered, the UK overhauls the Northern Ireland Protocol, does a lot of things that EU doesn't like, but is still not quite towards saying we're not doing anything. There are still controls in place, but the EU wants this all to stop. So it starts listing certain products that are potentially politically sensitive, and they will hope will lead to those constituencies within the UK putting pressure on the British government to behave more sensibly. And I think the thing the EU has here, which is probably useful for it, is that the US has already made this list for them. In that, over the course of the Boeing Airbus disputes, the US created a list of politically sensitive UK exports that could have tariffs applied to them in the event that the UK, in the case of the Boeing Airbus dispute, didn't go along with what the US wanted. And there's a part of it, and so this was in a recent newsletter letter, because I just pulled a load of it out of one of the US documents. You have the Scotland list, right, which has on it things like whiskey, but also cashmere, other things that are made in Scotland. And then you start looking around the country and you think, okay, well, maybe we could have a red wall list. What is made in the red wall? And obviously one of the first things you start thinking about was, well, we put some tariffs on cars. Governments. Very funny. Freeports. You suspend the bit of the TCA that says that you can have tariff-free trade even if you create in a free port. To really go at them. But you see what I mean? You start to just get very strategic about this and try to apply political, and you don't actually have to introduce these tariffs. This is the thing I would say, that you just have to start talking about introducing these tariffs to start triggering some of the, well, hopefully from their perspective, triggering some of the political backlash. And that's what it would not surprise me if at some point over the next 6 months the EU publishes a list, right? Yeah. And a sort of naughty list.
I can definitely see that happening. I think the thing is that if we do get into, as I said, trade wars at the top, we do get into nuclear options. And let's be in no doubt about how extreme some of those options become. So, for instance, if you have a complete breakdown in trust, you also have a complete breakdown in administration. If you have a complete breakdown in administration, you have a complete, in the EU's view, open door to the single market. And one of the most controversial stories I've ever written as a journalist is the what-if analysis that some EU countries have wanted to discuss, i.e. what do you do if the island of Ireland does become a backdoor into the single market, and they become so distrustful of the UK that they don't know how to handle that. And all of a sudden you have both sides in a very, very bad situation where someone has to decide, okay, do we check goods that come from the island of Ireland into the rest of the EU? We come back to the same story, which is if you have two regimes that will not cooperate together, you have to have a border somewhere. That border all of a sudden has become very, very hard. And then things start to get very, very difficult indeed. And I think this is why you end up straight back at a situation where other people will become very interested in finding a route to de-escalation. But there's no doubt that if you go beyond the list point that Sam describes, and by the way, that can get very nasty in terms of social fabric in the island of Ireland and Northern Ireland in particular, and in terms of the UK's own internal cohesion, by the way. So if you had a Scottish list, that would be very interesting in terms of the internal dynamics of the UK's internal market. But then you do have to build towards these what if analyses, and they even having the what if analyses for worst case situations here that go beyond the lists becomes an area of, enormous controversy. It's hard to underestimate how serious things will get, even when you have a list, because whenever you do these steps of escalation, you have to offer the what next, even if it's only at a technical level. If it's at the technical level, by the way, people leak those papers. Like, all of those conversations can force and perpetuate the routes of escalation. So by the time we even get to a list, I think we should just be mindful of the fact that things can get very bad very quickly.
That's chilling.
Happy Friday.
Yeah, happy Friday, everyone. Some of you may survive. So in terms of just kind of to bring this right back, we're almost out of time, but I want to bring this back to kind of real people and real measures. So let's step away.
I don't know any of those.
Yeah, no. It's hard to see them from my ivory tower. Like, you got to really squint.
Yeah.
Eyes aren't what they used to be. But let's step away for a moment from Northern Ireland and the island of Ireland, because that's I think Anna's done a fantastic summary of the worst case scenario there, or at least the journey towards the worst case scenario there. Let's talk about kind of the rest of the EU and the rest of the UK. What are we talking about for real people? What are the potential consequences? I don't know. I can.
I guess businesses facing, a very rather than say a light touch approach to some of the administrations that businesses might face when it comes to going about their commercial activities that cross borders. You get a very intense approach. I think that would be sort of the most obvious, immediate effect that you'd expect. And you're seeing this now with at a sort of a very particular level with checking boats licenses, for example, and making sure that you check every single one, as opposed to, say, 1 in 5 or one that you saw over there that looked a bit odd even. So there were just various layers of the rigor at which you can administrate things. I'd say that's the kind of the most obvious one, and often the most disruptive.
What about, so things that people have asked me is like, okay, on day 2 of a trade war, does the UK lose equivalency in GDPR?
Maybe. I'm sure there's a process, so it might not be.
I'm being glib, but
I mean, so we haven't discussed adequacy, but it's a good point to raise, because the adequacy arrangement, which continues to allow for the personal data of EU citizens to be stored and processed on servers physically located in the United Kingdom, is outside of the trade and cooperation agreement. So it's actually a point of leverage that the EU has that's independent of the structures created to deal with disputes within the TCA, and it's also a unilateral measure. So, I mean, there's a part of me that thinks that if we get to the point of the TCA being suspended, adequacy would have gone a little while before then, because you probably go there first.
So step 1 would be you kind of do what the TCA internally allows you to do. Step 2 is you look at all of the measures of cooperation, like adequacy, where the EU and UK have granted one another things sort of almost unilaterally or in a sort of friendly exchange that they can tear up without any consequences to the TCA, but which make it much harder to do business across the channel. And then the third stage is tearing up TCA. So you revert the trade back to WTO tariffs and you eliminate all of the trade facilitation measures inside the TCA. And then step 4 is you go beyond the TCA.
But that makes it sound like a slow process. And I agree with Anna that if things go really, really bad, so if it goes nuclear, I think all of this could just happen at the same time or very, very quickly. So I think the nuclear option arises if the UK's actions are deemed to be daring the EU to put a border up between Ireland and the rest of the EU. And I think in that circumstance, the internal politics of the EU and internal cohesion require the EU to essentially say, you've got 10 days to reverse this or the TCA goes. Yeah. Because otherwise, they'll be playing into the UK's hands.
So the logic there, to kind of put together what you and Anna were saying, if the UK puts the EU into a situation where its options are build a hard border between the rest of the EU and the island of Ireland, or build a border on the island of Ireland, the first thing that they will have to demonstrate politically, even if they're not sure it will work, is a method where they try to cause as much pain to the United Kingdom to get them to back down. So they open up and they basically hit the UK, or threaten to hit the UK with everything, in order to be able to turn around to their own constituents, and I think to the US and others, and say, hey, listen, like we tried, short of invading Brixton, we've got we threw everything we had at it. Is that fair, Anna?
Yeah, I think when it comes to thinking about how it all falls down, I think let's think about how it was all built up, which was that really until you had an agreement on Northern Ireland, you couldn't really have anything else. And that's why I'm so worried that if you don't have an agreement on Northern Ireland, the reverse becomes the case. That it's a structure on which, quite rightly, the people of Northern Ireland were meant to be perceived by both sides as the priority, because there was a very human element beyond plenty of other trade agreements. The human element here was so extraordinarily